We live in a world where personal success is often the measure of a life well lived. The narrative we are constantly fed encourages us to chase after our dreams, to focus on our own aspirations, and to build a life that serves our personal interests. This is the reality we are told to pursue the idea that we should live for ourselves, accumulating wealth, power, and recognition. But what if this path leads us astray? What if in our pursuit of success we lose sight of a deeper, more meaningful life? Today I want to take you down a different path. Not the road to material success, but the road to spiritual awareness, the road that calls us to look within ourselves, to examine our hearts and lives, and to recognize where the shadows of selfishness and pride may be taking root. It is so easy to become consumed with our own desires, to ignore the impact of our actions on those around us, and to believe that we are entitled to everything we seek. But in this self-absorbed pursuit, we can miss the essence of what it means to truly live. There is a dark side to this path, a side that many do not want to confront. It is the life of a man who lives only for himself, a man who becomes blind to the needs of others and deaf to the voice of conscience. This is not a man who has chosen an evil path consciously, but one who, through his choices, has allowed the subtle forces of selfishness and pride to take over his heart. It is a life that may appear prosperous on the outside, but is filled with emptiness, deception, and destruction on the inside. The reason why we must confront this reality today is that we are all susceptible to this trap. The signs of a man consumed by self-interest and pride are not always immediately visible. Often, they begin as small thoughts, small choices that slowly transform a person into someone they never intended to be. The danger lies not in the obvious signs of evil, but in the quiet, insidious nature of selfishness. And so, as we examine this life, let us not look only at others, but also at ourselves. Are we living with awareness of the impact our choices have on others? Are we walking a path that reflects love, compassion, and service, or have we too become trapped in the pursuit of personal gain? To truly understand the depth of this issue, we must first realize that a life lived solely for oneself is a life out of alignment with its true purpose. We were not created to live in isolation, focused only on our own desires and comforts. We were created for connection, for relationship, for the betterment of the world around us. The evil that arises from a life lived only for oneself is not always marked by grand acts of malice or destruction, but by a slow, steady erosion of the soul. This kind of evil is rooted in a disregard for others, in an unwillingness to see beyond our own needs, and in a belief that the world exists to serve us. Yet the road to evil is not always obvious. It often begins in subtle ways. It can be found in the small moments when we choose to ignore the pain of another, when we prioritize our own comfort over someone else's well-being, when we believe that we deserve more than others. These seemingly harmless moments are the building blocks of a selfish life. Over time, they form a character that is disconnected from compassion, humility, and the understanding that our lives are interconnected with others. The reason this message is important is because it challenges us to take a closer look at our own hearts. Are we truly living with a sense of purpose that goes beyond our own desires? Are we aware of the choices we make each day and how they affect those around us? In the hustle and bustle of life, it is easy to forget that our actions ripple out, impacting the people we encounter. We may think that we are living for ourselves in pursuit of our own happiness, but in doing so, we may be walking down a path that leads to emptiness. Consider for a moment the man who lives only for himself. He may achieve great things, he may build an empire, but what does it matter if in the process he loses his soul? A life lived in isolation, with no regard for others, may seem fulfilling for a time, but it ultimately leads to dissatisfaction and loneliness. There is a deep hunger in the human soul for connection, for love, for purpose beyond personal gain. Without these things, no amount of wealth or power can satisfy. As we begin to explore the signs of an evil man who lives only for himself, let us do so with humility. Let us not look at this message as one that is meant to condemn, but rather as a guide to help us recognize the ways in which we may have strayed from our true calling. We all have moments when we are tempted to act out of selfishness, to prioritize our own comfort, to seek our own glory. But it is in recognizing these moments, in choosing a different path, that we are able to reclaim the fullness of life that we were meant to live. In the following words, we will explore the characteristics of a life that has been consumed by selfishness. But remember, this is not just a reflection on the lives of others. It is a reminder to each of us to stay vigilant, to guard our hearts, and to align our lives with a higher purpose, one that is rooted in love, service, and faith. May we all take a moment to reflect on our own journey and ask ourselves, are we living for something greater than ourselves? Or are we, too, being led down a path of self-destruction, blind to the damage we are doing to our souls and to those around us? The answer, my friends, is in our hands. 1. He is self-centered in all things. At the very core of a man who lives solely for himself is a profound self-centeredness, a mindset where every thought, every decision, and every action is driven by his own desires and needs. This self-centeredness is not merely about seeking personal happiness. It's about placing oneself at the center of the universe, treating the world as a stage for one's own performance. To such a man, everything exists in relation to his own convenience and satisfaction. The lives of others, their pain, their joy, their struggles, all become insignificant in comparison to the priority he places on himself. This kind of self-centeredness is subtle in its beginnings but dangerous in its progression. At first it may appear harmless, even rational. After all, isn't it natural to focus on one's own well-being? Isn't it important to ensure that one is comfortable, that one's needs are met? But there's a fine line between looking after yourself and becoming so absorbed in your own world that you lose sight of the world around you. A self-centered individual gradually shifts from having a healthy concern for self-preservation to a selfish preoccupation that blinds them to everything but their own needs. A self-centered man is not concerned with the needs or desires of others. When he listens to someone speak, his thoughts are not about understanding or offering support. They are about how the conversation affects him, what he can gain from it, or how it serves his purpose. He hears but does not truly listen. For his own perspective, his own feelings, and his own goals take precedence over the emotions and needs of others. This behavior manifests in all areas of his life, in personal relationships, in professional interactions, and even in the way he engages with the world around him. In relationships, this self-centeredness is toxic. It turns every interaction into a transaction, a means to an end. The self-centered man seeks not to give but to take. He may offer words of kindness, gestures of affection, or tokens of love, but they are always with the expectation of something in return. His love, his care, his attention are contingent on what he can gain from others. And when he feels he has given enough or received what he desires, he pulls away. This transactional view of relationships is the root of many broken bonds, whether in friendships, marriages, or family ties. What begins as a mutual exchange of support becomes a one-sided, unbalanced relationship where only one party's needs are met. The self-centered man also has a distorted view of the world itself. He sees every opportunity as something to be seized for his own benefit, every challenge as something to overcome for his personal glory. When faced with a situation requiring sacrifice or humility, he resists, for it conflicts with his belief that the world should cater to his desires. He may ignore the needs of the less fortunate, the voices of the oppressed, and the suffering of others, because he is too focused on what will bring him success, recognition, or wealth. Compassion, empathy, and humility, qualities that require one to step outside of themselves and care for others, are alien to him. These virtues are seen as weaknesses, something to be avoided in his relentless pursuit of self-interest. This self-centeredness is not only harmful to others, it is also damaging to the individual. At its root, it denies the very essence of what it means to be human. We are designed for connection, for empathy, for service. When we disconnect from others and focus solely on our own desires, we lose touch with our deeper purpose. The self-centered man may experience temporary pleasure in fulfilling his personal desires, but he is ultimately left empty, For no amount of self-centered pursuit can ever truly satisfy the soul. In his quest for fulfillment, he finds himself constantly seeking more success, more pleasure, more recognition, but never finding the peace and contentment that comes from giving and connecting with others. Self-centeredness leads to isolation. In the pursuit of personal gain, the self-centered man alienates himself from the very people who could offer him support, understanding, and love. He may have many acquaintances, but he lacks true friendships. He may climb to great heights in his career, but he does so alone. The people he encounters along the way are mere stepping stones to him, tools to be used and discarded when no longer needed. In the end, he is surrounded by people who serve his purpose, but not by the true companionship that brings fulfillment. This kind of existence, the life of a man who is solely focused on himself, is ultimately one of loneliness and emptiness. It is a life disconnected from the essence of what it means to live with purpose. A man who lives for himself cannot see beyond his own desires, and in doing so he loses sight of the richness of life that comes from service, empathy, and connection. He may build empires, amass wealth, and gain power, but in the process he forfeits something far more valuable, the ability to truly live. The self-centered man is a prisoner of his own ego, trapped in a cycle of seeking more and more, but never finding what truly satisfies. His focus on himself ultimately leads him to a barren existence, a life that lacks meaning, a soul that lacks fulfillment. The true measure of a life well lived is not found in self-interest, but in the capacity to love, to serve, and to connect with others in meaningful ways. Only when we look beyond ourselves and focus on the well-being of others do we discover the profound richness that life has to offer. 2. He lacks empathy and compassion. A man who lives only for himself is devoid of one of the most essential virtues that define our humanity: empathy. Empathy is the ability to put oneself in another's shoes, to feel their pain, their joy, their struggles, and their triumphs as though they were your own. It is the key to building meaningful relationships, to understanding and serving others, and to creating a compassionate world. Without empathy, a person is blind to the needs of those around him, seeing only his own desires and disregarding the pain of others. The man who lacks empathy is not malicious at first glance. He may even appear kind, courteous, and well-mannered. But beneath the surface, his indifference to the suffering of others reveals his true nature. When someone shares their problems, their heart arches, or their struggles, he listens, but only half-heartedly. His thoughts wander and his mind drifts back to himself. He may offer a few words of consolation, but they are hollow, for he is not truly invested in the pain of another. His responses are calculated, designed to keep the conversation on his terms, and any genuine connection is lost in the process. The absence of empathy is not just an emotional void, it is a moral failing. It creates a barrier between the self-centered man and the rest of the world. To him, others are mere objects or obstacles, tools to be used or problems to be solved. He does not see them as fellow travelers on life's journey, each with their own dreams, struggles, and aspirations. Instead, he views them through the lens of how they can benefit him, or how their needs may inconvenience his own desires. This lack of empathy leads to a life of emotional isolation, where the man cannot relate to others on a deeper, meaningful level. The tragedy of a life lived without empathy is that it denies the richness of human connection. Empathy is what enables us to understand and love one another. It allows us to reach out to the suffering, to stand with the oppressed, and to lift up the broken-hearted. It is through empathy that we are able to serve others, to truly make a difference in their lives. A man who lacks empathy, however, is cut off from this life of service. He cannot offer a listening ear to someone in need because he cannot truly hear their pain. He cannot offer a shoulder to cry on because he is too absorbed in his own world. The self-centered man's lack of empathy often leads him to act in ways that harm others, either unintentionally or intentionally. He may take advantage of someone's vulnerability for his own gain, or ignore the needs of those less fortunate because they do not serve his immediate interests. The impact of his actions ripples through the lives of others, causing pain and disappointment. But the self-centered man remains oblivious, unable to understand the emotional damage he causes because he is too focused on his own concerns. Without empathy, the self-centered man also struggles to develop true, lasting relationships. Relationships require understanding, compromise, and mutual support, all of which are built on a foundation of empathy. A man who cannot feel for others, who cannot see beyond his own desires, will find it difficult, if not impossible, to form deep connections. Friendships, love, and family bonds become superficial, transactional exchanges. He may have many acquaintances, but few true friends. He may receive affection, but it is not the genuine kind that comes from shared vulnerability and understanding. Empathy is also the cornerstone of leadership. A true leader does not lead through force or manipulation, but through understanding and compassion. He listens to the concerns of his people, feels their struggles, and acts with the intention of improving their lives. A leader without empathy is a tyrant, a dictator who serves only his own desires and ignores the needs of those he is supposed to serve. The self-centered man may rise to power, but his reign will be marked by selfish ambition, lack of trust, and ultimately failure. But the good news is that empathy is not a trait reserved for a select few. It is a skill that can be cultivated in anyone willing to open their heart and mind to others. It begins with a willingness to listen, to pay attention to the feelings of others, and to understand their experiences. It requires humility, the recognition that we are not the center of the universe, and that the struggles of others matter just as much as our own. And it requires action, the willingness to extend kindness, compassion, and support to those who need it. Empathy is a powerful force that connects us all, reminding us that we are not isolated beings, but part of a greater whole. It is through empathy that we discover the true beauty of life, the richness that comes from serving others, the joy that comes from making someone else's life better, and the peace that comes from knowing that we are not alone. A life lived without empathy is a life that misses out on the deep, profound connections that make life worth living. When we choose empathy, we choose a life of meaning, purpose, and love. 3. He is driven by pride and arrogance. A man who lives solely for himself is often driven by the twin forces of pride and arrogance. These traits are deeply rooted in a sense of superiority, a belief that he is better than others and entitled to more than they are. This pride is not the quiet, humble confidence that comes from knowing one's worth. It is an inflated sense of self, a desire to be seen as great in the eyes of the world. It is the fuel that drives him to assert his importance and belittle others in an attempt to feel superior. Pride, in its most destructive form, blinds a man to his own faults and flaws. The proud man is incapable of self-reflection because he refuses to acknowledge that he may be wrong, weak, or imperfect. Instead of learning from his mistakes, he deflects blame, making excuses for his actions and pointing the finger at others. In his eyes, he can do no wrong. His decisions, his opinions, his desires are always right. This arrogance not only makes him unteachable, but also isolates him from the wisdom of others. He becomes a prisoner of his own ego, unable to grow or evolve, because he is too proud to admit that he has anything to learn. This arrogance manifests in many areas of life. In relationships, a man driven by pride may feel the need to dominate, to control, or to prove his worth at the expense of others. He believes his opinions are the only valid ones and dismisses the ideas, feelings, or perspectives of those around him. In his eyes, the needs and desires of others are secondary, irrelevant to the greatness he perceives in himself. His pride leads him to take credit for things he has not done, and to exaggerate his accomplishments, always seeking validation and admiration from those around him. The arrogance of such a man also leads to an inability to empathize, as we saw in the previous sign. How can he understand or care for the struggles of others when he is so consumed with his own inflated sense of importance? His pride shields him from seeing the humanity in others, reducing them to mere tools to bolster his ego or obstacles to his goals. The proud man is always in competition with the world, seeking to elevate himself by stepping on those beneath him, unaware that his arrogance only diminishes his true potential. What's even more dangerous is that pride blinds him to the reality that true greatness comes not from seeking admiration, but from serving others. In his arrogance, he mistakes the pursuit of power for purpose, status for significance. He is so focused on proving himself to the world that he neglects to build the kind of character that would make him truly great. True greatness is not defined by how high you climb, but by how much you lift others on the way. A man driven by pride will never understand this, for he sees himself as the measure of all things, incapable of recognizing the strength in humility, the power in service. Pride and arrogance rob a man of peace. He is always fighting for recognition, always seeking affirmation, always worried about how others perceive him. This constant striving for validation exhausts him, leaving him emotionally drained and spiritually empty. The arrogance that once brought him power and admiration will eventually turn into a burden, a weight he must carry for the rest of his life. What he fails to see is that true peace and fulfillment come not from elevating oneself above others, but from humbling oneself and serving a greater purpose. 4. He is selfish and greedy. A man who lives solely for himself is often driven by an insatiable hunger for more success, more wealth, more power, more recognition. This selfishness and greed are not born out of need, but from a deep, internal void that he is constantly trying to fill. No matter how much he acquires or achieves, it is never enough. There is always another goal, another desire, another step up the ladder to climb. His life becomes a never-ending pursuit of more. And in the process, he loses sight of the most important things that cannot be measured in material wealth or outward success. Selfishness, at its core, is a mindset that places one's own desires above all else. The selfish man views everything in the world through the lens of how it benefits him. His thoughts, actions, and decisions revolve around his personal gain. He makes choices based on what will bring him the most satisfaction, comfort, or power, without consideration for the consequences on others. Relationships, for example, become transactional. He is only interested in what he can get out of them. Whether it's time, affection, or resources, he is quick to take but slow to give. He expects others to meet his needs without any thought of reciprocation. This selfishness is often linked with greed and excessive desire to possess more than what is necessary or even deserved. The greedy man believes that accumulating wealth, possessions, or accolades will bring him happiness or satisfaction, but it never does. The more he gets, the more he craves. He is driven by the fear that there might not be enough for him, and as a result, he hoards resources often at the expense of others. His greed blinds him to the fact that true wealth is not found in material possessions, but in meaningful connections, acts of kindness, and a heart full of gratitude. Selfishness and greed often cause harm to those around him. The greedy man will use others to get ahead, exploiting their time, energy, or resources for his own benefit. He may make promises he never intends to keep, deceive others for personal gain, or manipulate situations to ensure his own success, all while showing little regard for the well-being of those affected. His relationships are shallow and self-serving because they are based on what others can provide him, not on mutual respect, love, or support. This kind of life is isolating. The man who lives solely for himself may find temporary success or material satisfaction, but the emptiness he feels within will never be filled by things. True fulfillment comes not from what we gain, but from what we give. A life of selflessness, of generosity, and of serving others brings joy and contentment that cannot be measured in bank accounts or accolades. The problem with selfishness and greed is that they distort one's perspective. A man who is consumed by these desires sees the world as a place where everything is a resource for him to exploit. He fails to understand that life is about interconnectedness, that the more we give, the more we receive in ways that are far more valuable than material wealth. Relationships, love, joy, and fulfillment cannot be bought. They must be cultivated through selflessness, compassion, and sacrifice. The greedy man may accumulate wealth and status, but he will always find himself empty. He will have everything he ever wanted, yet never feel satisfied. The trap of selfishness is that it can never truly be fulfilled. It is a cycle that only grows stronger the more it is fed, leaving him perpetually dissatisfied. In his relentless pursuit of more, he will miss the beauty and joy that comes from giving and serving others, and in the end, he will have nothing of true value to show for his life. A life of selfishness and greed may seem rewarding in the short term, but it is hollow. The true riches of life come not from accumulation, but from giving, from sharing what we have with others, from living with purpose beyond ourselves, and from embracing the blessings that come when we take our eyes off our own desires and look to the needs of those around us. A man who lives only for himself will find that, no matter how much he gains, he is never truly rich. 5. He is unforgiving and holds grudges. A man who lives only for himself is often deeply entrenched in unforgiveness. He clings to the wounds of the past, allowing them to fester and grow, nourishing them with bitterness and resentment. His inability to forgive those who have wronged him is one of the most destructive signs of a self-centered life, for it locks him in a prison of his own making. It is a prison where his thoughts are consumed by the wrongs others have done to him, where his heart remains closed off to the healing power of grace and reconciliation. Forgiveness is not just an act of releasing others from their debts, it is a gift we give ourselves. It is a choice to free ourselves from the chains of anger, hurt, and resentment that can poison our minds and spirits. However, the unforgiving man lives with these chains wrapped tightly around his heart, holding on to past offenses as though they define him. He has an unyielding need for retribution, a desire to see justice served on his terms, often to the detriment of his own peace. His focus is on what others have taken from him, rather than what he can offer to heal and move forward. The unforgiving man sees the world as a battlefield where everyone is a potential enemy. His past grievances shape his worldview, and he views every interaction through the lens of past betrayals and hurts. Rather than letting go of old wounds, he wears them as armor, convinced that he must protect himself from being hurt again. This mindset blinds him to the possibility of reconciliation and growth. Where there could be healing, there is instead a festering wound. Where there could be peace, there is only conflict and division. In relationships, the unforgiving man is like a storm that never clears. He refuses to let go of the hurts caused by others, even if they are small or insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He holds on to grudges, replaying past wrongs in his mind until they consume him, defining his interactions with others. He may push people away, refusing to open his heart to those who have hurt him, even if they have sought forgiveness or made amends. His pride tells him that to forgive would be to let the offender off the hook. But in reality, it is he who remains bound by the offense, trapped in a cycle of anger and regret. The unforgiving man also struggles with personal growth. He is unable to move forward because his past hurts constantly anchor him to a time and place of pain. His energy is spent on keeping the record of wrongs, on rehearsing the injustices he believes he has suffered. But in doing so, he misses the opportunities for transformation and peace that forgiveness offers. To forgive is not to forget, it is to release the power that the offense has over you. It is to say, I will not allow this past hurt to define me or control my future. Forgiveness gives us the freedom to grow, to learn, and to move on, unburdened by the weight of old wounds. What is often lost on the unforgiving man is that holding a grudge is a poison that slowly corrodes his soul. The bitterness he holds on to eats away at his joy, his relationships, and his peace of mind. Every moment spent nursing a grudge is a moment lost to negativity. Forgiveness, on the other hand, brings release, clarity, and healing. When we forgive, we free ourselves from the emotional hold that others have over us. We stop allowing the past to dictate our present and our future. Furthermore, the unforgiving man sets a dangerous precedent for those around him. His inability to forgive teaches others that anger, resentment, and retribution are the proper responses to wrongs. He becomes a model of bitterness, perpetuating a cycle of unforgiveness that spreads like a disease. This affects not only his relationships with others, but also his relationship with himself. The anger and pain he holds on to prevents him from experiencing true peace, true joy, and true connection with those around him. The act of forgiveness is a powerful weapon against the forces of division and hate in the world. It is a sign of strength, not weakness, to forgive. It is a recognition that while we cannot change the past, we can control how we respond to it. Forgiveness does not condone wrong behavior, it simply chooses to release the power it has over us. It allows us to reclaim our peace and to live with a heart full of grace. A man who cannot forgive may find temporary satisfaction in harboring his grudges, but he will never know the freedom and healing that comes from letting go of the past. The unforgiving man is a prisoner, chained to his anger and resentment, unable to experience the full richness of life. But the man who chooses forgiveness lives with a lightness in his soul, a peace that transcends the wrongs of the past, and the ability to move forward into a future of hope and renewal. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door to a brighter tomorrow. 6. He seeks control over others. One of the most glaring signs of a man who lives solely for himself is his unrelenting desire to control the people around him. He is not content with leading by example or inspiring others to follow him. Instead, he seeks to dominate, manipulate, and subjugate others to serve his own needs and desires. Control, to him, is not just about authority or influence, it is about ensuring that everything and everyone bends to his will, that nothing happens without his say-so. The man who seeks control is often motivated by fear. He fears uncertainty, vulnerability, and the idea that things might not go as planned. In his mind, if he can control the actions, thoughts, and decisions of others, he can create a reality that feels predictable and safe. But in truth, this desire for control stems from a lack of trust, not only in others but also in God and in the natural order of life. The more he strives to control, the more he tightens his grip, often to the point where it becomes suffocating. This leads to an unhealthy dynamic where those around him feel trapped, disempowered, and invisible. In relationships, this need for control manifests in various ways. It may be through constant criticism, where he belittles the thoughts, decisions, or actions of others in an effort to make them conform to his standards. It may be through manipulation, where he uses guilt, shame, or emotional tactics to make others do his bidding. He may attempt to control those closest to him, from family members to colleagues, always seeking to have the upper hand. In these instances, his own desires and comfort take precedence over the needs and well-being of those around him. This kind of behavior is toxic and corrosive, both to the person seeking control and to those who are subjected to it. The controlled person may lose their sense of self, their confidence, and their autonomy. Over time, the relationship becomes one-sided, where the controlling man gets what he wants, but the other person is left feeling unheard, unseen, and diminished. This creates an unhealthy imbalance where trust, respect, and love are replaced by manipulation, fear, and resentment. True love and healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, shared understanding, and freedom. However, a man who is driven by a need for control stifles these qualities in favor of dominance. Moreover, the control-seeking man often has difficulty understanding that true leadership is not about making others follow blindly. True leadership comes from the ability to inspire others through integrity, empathy, and vision. A leader does not need to manipulate, force, or dominate. Rather, they inspire others to rise to their full potential. A man who lives for himself fails to recognize this truth. He mistakes control for strength, when in reality, it is a form of insecurity. He believes that if he can make others submit to his will, he will feel powerful and in control of his world. But this kind of power is fleeting, because it is built on fear and manipulation. Control also prevents personal growth and transformation. The man who seeks to control others will resist the opportunity to learn from them. He is convinced that he has all the answers and that everyone should do things his way. This arrogance stunts his development, because growth comes not from control but from collaboration, humility, and openness to new ideas. Instead of listening, learning, and evolving, the control-seeking man remains stuck in a cycle of rigid thinking and behavior, incapable of seeing things from a broader perspective. What he fails to realize is that true power lies in letting go of the need to control. The strongest men are those who can inspire others through their actions, their values, and their character. They do not force others to follow, rather they lead by serving, by empowering those around them, and by showing respect for the autonomy and dignity of others. When we relinquish the need to control, we open ourselves up to true growth, deeper connections, and a life of peace and fulfillment. A man driven by the need to control will find himself isolated, his relationships strained, and his peace stolen. Control is an illusion. No one can control everything, and in the end it is only through surrendering our need for power and dominance that we find true freedom. The man who seeks control may temporarily feel secure, but it is a fragile security that is built on fear and manipulation. True strength, however, is found in letting go of control, in trusting others, and in allowing life to unfold with grace and faith. 7. He lives a life of deception. A man who lives only for himself is often caught in a web of lies and deception, both to others and, most tragically, to himself. Deception becomes his tool for self-preservation, a way to maintain the image he wants others to see while concealing the truths he fears might expose his flaws, weaknesses, or wrongdoings. The man who seeks to deceive is not interested in authenticity or integrity. He is interested only in what benefits him in the moment, regardless of the cost to others or to his own soul. This man may deceive in small ways by exaggerating achievements or hiding mistakes, or in grand ways by constructing elaborate falsehoods that protect his ego and his self-image. He may manipulate the truth to paint himself in a better light, to make himself appear more competent, more successful, or more virtuous than he actually is. Every interaction becomes a chance to reinforce his constructed persona, as though he believes that living a lie is easier than facing the truth of who he is. But lies have a dangerous tendency to unravel. The more a man deceives, the more entangled he becomes in his own fabrications. The lies pile upon one another, creating a maze of contradictions and half-truths that become impossible to navigate. This web of deceit not only damages his relationships with others, but also erodes his own sense of peace. Deep down, he knows he is not living truthfully, and this inner conflict creates a constant state of anxiety, guilt, and fear of being exposed. Deception is a symptom of self-centeredness. It stems from the need to protect one's image and avoid the discomfort of vulnerability. The deceptive man is terrified of being seen for who he truly is, because he believes that his worth lies in external validation and approval. He convinces himself that if others knew the truth about him, his flaws, his mistakes, his shortcomings, they would no longer admire or respect him. So he resorts to hiding behind a someone he is not in order to secure the admiration he craves. The life of deception also prevents true connection with others. Relationships built on lies are fragile, because trust is the foundation of any meaningful connection. When a man chooses deception, he chooses to live in isolation. Even though he may surround himself with people, he remains emotionally distant, for he cannot afford to show his true self. His relationships are shallow, transactional, and ultimately unfulfilling, because the people around him are relating to a false version of who he is. This is a lonely existence, one where true intimacy is impossible. Furthermore, a man who deceives others is also deceiving himself. He may convince himself that his lies are harmless, that they are just little adjustments to make life easier or more palatable. But in doing so, he compromises his own integrity. Every lie, no matter how small, chips away at his sense of self-respect. Over time, he becomes so accustomed to living in falsehood that he no longer knows where the truth begins and the lie ends. His character becomes distorted, and he loses sight of the values and principles that once guided him. The consequences of living a life of deception are profound. Not only does it create a barrier between the man and the world around him, but it also distances him from his own soul. To live authentically is to align one's actions with one's values, to be true to who we are, and to walk in the light of truth. Deception robs a man of this alignment, creating an inner fracture that leaves him spiritually bankrupt. A life of deception is a life of fear of being discovered, a fear of rejection, and a fear of facing the truth. But the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only path to freedom. When we embrace authenticity and honesty, we free ourselves from the burdens of self-deception and the need to manipulate others. Only by living truthfully can we experience the peace that comes from knowing we are enough, just as we are. It is this authenticity that allows us to build genuine relationships, to grow in character, and to live a life of purpose. 8. He lacks empathy for others. A man who lives only for himself is often devoid of empathy, a crucial quality that allows individuals to understand and share the feelings of others. Empathy is the bridge that connects us to the world around us, allowing us to step outside of our own narrow experiences and connect with the struggles, joys, and needs of others. For the self-centered man, however, others are often seen only as tools for personal gain, or as obstacles to be avoided or manipulated. This lack of empathy manifests in several ways. He may be indifferent to the pain or suffering of those around him, seeing it as irrelevant to his own life. He is so consumed by his own desires and ambitions that he has little room to consider the emotional or spiritual needs of others. When someone close to him faces a hardship, he may offer a hollow, detached response, or worse yet, ignore their suffering altogether. His world revolves around himself, and anything that does not serve his immediate needs becomes secondary. Without empathy, he is unable to connect with others on a deeper level. Relationships with him are often shallow and transactional, based solely on what he can get out of the connection rather than what he can give. Whether it's a friend, family member, or colleague, he struggles to listen, understand, or offer support. Instead of seeing the humanity in others, he views them through a lens of utility. What can they do for him? What benefit can they bring to his life? In the absence of empathy, compassion also suffers. True compassion involves not only feeling for others, but acting on that feeling to alleviate their pain or help them grow. A man who lacks empathy may avoid getting involved with others' challenges, believing that it is not his responsibility. He fails to recognize that by turning a blind eye to the suffering of others, he is also turning away from the deeper connection and purpose that comes with loving and serving others. A life without empathy ultimately leaves him isolated, disconnected from the very essence of what it means to be human. He may achieve temporary success, but his inability to truly connect with others ensures that any success he achieves will be hollow and unsatisfying. Only by opening our hearts to the struggles and needs of those around us can we experience the richness of true relationships and live a life of deeper fulfillment. 9. He shows no genuine desire for growth. A man who lives only for himself often demonstrates little to no genuine desire for personal growth. Growth requires introspection, humility, and a willingness to confront one's flaws and shortcomings. But for the man who is consumed with self-interest, these things are an inconvenience. He sees no need to evolve or improve because in his eyes he is already the center of the universe. The idea of self-improvement is foreign to him, as his world revolves around maintaining the status quo, whatever keeps him comfortable and in control. This lack of desire for growth manifests in several ways. First, he resists feedback and criticism. Constructive criticism, which is essential for personal development, is seen as an attack on his character rather than an opportunity for growth. He may dismiss the input of others or become defensive, unwilling to listen or reflect on how he can improve. Growth requires vulnerability, but the self-centered man has built walls around himself, afraid to expose any weakness that might challenge his inflated self-image. Without a desire for growth, he also fails to seek wisdom or knowledge. The pursuit of wisdom is often guided by a recognition that we do not have all the answers, but the man who lives solely for himself believes that he knows enough. He is too proud or complacent to seek out new experiences or engage with ideas that challenge his thinking. This intellectual stagnation leads to a narrow, shallow understanding of the world and the people around him. Moreover, without a commitment to growth, he cannot build meaningful relationships. Relationships thrive on mutual learning and development, where both individuals support each other's personal evolution. But for the man focused only on himself, relationships become transactional. They are not spaces for growth, but rather arenas for self-serving behavior. This prevents him from forming the deep, authentic connections that come from growing together. A man who does not desire growth is not only stagnant but also increasingly irrelevant. His lack of evolution leaves him disconnected from the world around him, stuck in the same patterns and unable to tap into the deeper purpose that comes from growth. True success, fulfillment, and peace come only when we continually strive to become better versions of ourselves, and that is something a self-centered man will never understand. In closing, we must understand that a life driven purely by self-interest is ultimately a life devoid of purpose, fulfillment, and true connection. The signs we've explored, egoism, manipulation, a lack of empathy, deception, and stagnation, are not just traits of an individual who lives for himself, but markers of a soul that is disconnected from the very essence of what it means to be human. These signs may lead to temporary success, but they inevitably sow the seeds of isolation, bitterness, and spiritual emptiness. However, there is hope. The antidote to self-centeredness is found in living with a heart full of compassion, integrity, and a genuine desire to grow. When we shift our focus from what can I get to how can I give, we open ourselves to the abundant blessings that come from serving others, from living with authenticity, and from constantly striving to better ourselves for the greater good. It is in this selfless pursuit of truth and service that we begin to truly understand our purpose in life. Let us remember that our lives are not meant to be lived in isolation, but in community with others and with the world around us. We are not here simply to pursue our own desires, but to uplift, encourage, and support those we encounter. A life of humility, empathy, and growth is the life that will bring us peace, fulfillment, and ultimately a deeper connection to our Creator. So, as we reflect on the signs of a man who lives only for himself, let us also ask ourselves, are we living in a way that reflects our true purpose? Are we growing in character and compassion, seeking to serve others and elevate those around us? For in the end, it is not the self-centered man who finds lasting happiness, but the one who lives for a greater purpose than himself. Thank you, and may we all find the strength to live with selflessness, authenticity, and a heart full of love for others.